Welcome to Via the Grapevine, proudly brought to you by Tony DaCosta of Liquor City, Claremont, and offering you the chance to learn more about wine, the masters behind them, and even which wines to collect. Today, we head out to a fourth generation Stellenboschkloof estate that has a deep respect for heritage, a heritage of winemaking pioneers. The van Veldens have been innovators from the very start, and today, Overgaauw owner and winemaker David van Velden, or David van Velden, joins me to share more on this rich heritage. David, welcome. Is it David or David? Which do you prefer?
No, depending in which country I am. I think it's David. My grandfather always said the Hollandse David. So yeah, great to be with you guys. Thanks for inviting me. It was great to meet you last week and share a few of my wines, and looking forward to share a bit more as we continue the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And I've got another pronunciation question for you, because I read the label as Overgaauw, but when you were talking about it, you actually were presenting it as Overgaauw. So is there any...
Well, I think it comes down to in which country I'm in. I think once you get past the G, then you're okay. So Overgaauw is the pronunciation. That's the correct pronunciation. But when I'm in the US, then they'll enjoy. Well, they would use the pronunciation Overgaauw.
Oh yeah, they change everything, and I'd love to hear how they pronounce your surname over in the US. My goodness. So Overgaauw is not about being a flashy tourist trap. Some would say you're humble almost to a fault because of the incredible achievements the estate can boast of. And I thought of running through the list of accomplishments, and then I thought, no, I'm going to let David do it himself. So let's start with you sharing with the audience those incredible achievements to date, please.
Sure, I think there's what I've noticed is that myself and the previous three generations before me weren't very boastful people. So I think and that is almost to a fault. I think we need to boast a lot more about what we've achieved over the years, which I'm super proud of, and even more proud to be the custodian of all of that. But I think the most notable one, if we take it a bit sort of chronologically, would be in the sort of early 70s, actually 1970 to be exact. Overgaauw together with Sylvaner were the first producers in South Africa that matured red wine in small oak barrels. That results after a trip of my grandfather and Frans Milan to Bordeaux in 1968-69, and they bought some second fill barrels there from Chateau Latour, which is quite unique. And then, probably the most notable ones would be late 70s, which was really the start of the Bordeaux blend boom. My grandfather and my dad, together, winemakers at the time, was one of the pioneers of the Bordeaux style blend in South Africa. And then early 80s, obviously, that's when Stellenbosch really sort of put on the pedal on Bordeaux style blends. And my dad at the time, this was now 1984, when he was looking at the 82 Triacorda blend, looked at the Merlot components that he was going to use in the blend and said, "Wow, this is just a beautiful wine." And he shared a few samples with some colleagues in the industry, and everyone responded to him and said, "Bram, you're not going to sell a bottle of single cultivar Merlot. There's no way. Don't even try it. Don't even think of bottling it. It's not going to work." But 2 weeks later, got back to the winery, bottled South Africa's first Merlot, the 1982 vintage, and which is still the cultivar that I have a huge passion for today, and a cultivar that really performs well on Overgaauw. So that's and I actually opened a bottle of 1982 Merlot about 2 weeks ago. Picked the wine from the library and was still in really good shape. Still very much had some vibrance in it, and still very much a beautiful wine in the sense of occasion. And then, my grandfather always had a big passion for Portuguese cultivars as well. So he was also one of the first winemakers who made port from 100% Portuguese cultivars, and then was instrumental to plant the first Touriga Nacional in South Africa as well. So we still have the mother block of Touriga Nacional on Overgaauw, and still a fascinating cultivar to work with. I think it's got definitely well, if you look at just taking climate change, I think that's a cultivar that's definitely going to adapt really well over time. Yes, and yeah, so that's, I think we can definitely, and also the first producer of Sylvaner in South Africa. We'll have a conversation about that a bit later. And yes, so ultimately, yeah.
I believe you were also founder member of the Stellenbosch Wine Route and founding member of Cape Winemakers Guild. That's
right. So my grandfather was very much part of the package with the Stellenbosch Wine Routes starting, and this year we're celebrating the 50th year of the Stellenbosch Wine Route. So super proud of that. Also very excited to be on the board of directors. So really special to be part of all those plannings, and we've got some exciting stuff lined up for the year. So go check out the website at Stellenbosch Wine Routes. And yeah, so, and then the Cape Winemakers Guild, my dad was one of the founder members there. Just a bunch of lekker guys getting together, top winemakers saying, let's take the industry to another level and quality of wine. So yeah, some exciting stuff that we were involved with, and definitely looking ahead to carry on with that.
And it's a wonderful program. I mean, we've had on via the Grapevine a couple of weeks back. We had one of the protege winemakers who's now at Brookdale, Kiara Scott. Fantastic talent, creating wine of a class and standard well beyond her physical age. So absolutely sensational. With such a foundation set by your great-grandfather, I imagine it was natural that you would have a passion for wine. But was winemaking always a goal, or did you have other career aspirations?
Well, yes. To be honest, I never recall a moment where I said, "Geez, I want to be a winemaker and I want to sort of take this thing to another level." It was, well, I'm actually sitting around the table right now where I had my first glass of wine that I can remember. I guess I had a few sips before I could remember. But sitting at the table where we would start off with half water, half wine, and that was sort of the introduction to enjoying and appreciating wine. But it's always been something that I really love being involved in. Love spending time as a kid in the vineyards. Love spending time with my dad in the winery. He's got a few stories that he's been telling about me being a bit of a nuisance in the winery, and he had to lock the doors to keep me out. So that's so I guess it was in my blood from the beginning. And but over time, when I took over the business from my dad, you realize you always have those fond memories, but it's still lots of scour and reveal work that needs doing, and yeah, so the passion has always been there, and it's just super valuable being able to live that every day and try and share that with more people.
It's a special privilege, I would imagine, to have that heritage. And both your grandfather and your dad were extremely passionate about viticulture and shaping the authenticity and the expression of sight in the wines that you produce. You mentioned that you continued with this intention by a recent increase of focus and discipline in the vineyard. Tell us more.
Yes, in 2016, I realized and got to a point especially on the viticulture side of the farm where I made myself aware of the fact that with my knowledge and passion and sentiment towards the property is something that I've obviously feel that I'm very close to and feel very specific about. But I also realized that I need to sort of not let that be the only guide in where we're heading with viticulture on the farm. And I wanted to sort of get an independent view of what the potential of this site would have been. So I was introduced to a phenomenal viticulturist called Jaco Engelbrecht from Visual Viticulture, and he's like, I don't think he'll mind me saying it, but if there's anyone that wouldn't mind getting into a bed with a vine, it'll probably be Jaco Engelbrecht. He's extremely passionate, and so we started chatting, and I said to him, Jaco, and he started asking questions about, okay, why is this your best parcel? Why is this your best Merlot? Why? And when I realized, well, I couldn't really answer most of those questions. So he came in with a very specific knowledge of, and then also the use of technology, and then also most importantly, the interpretation of the results of technology. So measuring solar radiation, measuring NDVIs during the growing season. It was all just stuff where I realized that I thought I knew a little bit about viticulture, and then since I started working with Jaco, I realized, geez, I don't really know much about viticulture. So he's an amazing addition to the team, and together with Jaco, I use a viticulture consultant called Franco Hanekom from Winelands Estate Management, and what he taught me, together with Jaco, is the specific discipline in the vineyard. So although we've as you mentioned, my grandfather, my dad was very instrumental in understanding which varietals work on the farm, but I've noticed that since working with these two guys, the timing and discipline in when a vineyard needs to be suckered or tipped or leaves broken away or anything like that or canopy management in general is not something, yes, so let's do it tomorrow, or no, we'll get around to it next week. If Jaco says that it needs to happen tomorrow morning first thing, otherwise we're going to miss the window period, then Franco will be ready and his team will be here for 20 minutes, half an hour, do the job, and then they're off to another site again. So that discipline is super important, and I've noticed, well, the best part of it is that one can start realizing it in the wines, and we'll elaborate on it a bit later also, but one of the things is the leaf roll eradication. So the leaf roll virus is a huge challenge for the whole industry. You've probably had a few conversations with guys about that as well, but it's a big challenge, and I've, with the guidance of Jaco, we've now managed to get my Merlot and Cabernet Franc vineyards, two of the Merlot and Cabernet Franc vineyards 100% virus free, and to see the impact on just quality and vine health and vine longevity is just an absolute no-brainer. Why that should actually be the first, number one priority in viticulture should be leaf roll eradication. But it is a challenging project because no one can afford just to uproot a virus vine, block the vineyards, and then carry on because of the capital and cash flow constraints of all of that. But that's definitely a discipline that I'm super grateful we managed to implement on the farm, and especially on the Merlot and Cabernet Franc vineyards now. Well, basically set to become 60, 70, 80 years old. There's no reason, if we keep on keeping that discipline, there's no reason why those shouldn't become amazing old wines over time. And my children maybe one day making wines from that same vineyard.
That's fantastic. And it's interesting to hear how you use the word discipline, because I suppose there is space when you're the fourth generation owner and winemaker to become a little complacent because we've been doing it well and we've been creating wonderful wines. Why must we shift? So well done to you for actually taking that initiative and saying, no, let's see what we can tighten up and hone, and and as you say, hopefully that will continue for many, many more years. And you mentioned your kids. Do you think there will be an interest from one of them to be a winemaker and take over?
Well, depends if there's going to be another pandemic in 40 years' time or so. I'll probably discourage them.
Yeah.
No, well, we'll see how they're 8 years old, 6-year-old, and 3-year-old. All three boys. So we'll see. At this point, it's just a treat to see them running around and spending time in the vineyards and the winery with me. So we'll see. I'm definitely not, I won't force them into anything because I was also never forced into anything. So let's see how they develop. And I'm pretty sure already they've got a good nose and palate for wine. So I guess that'll be a good start.
You've got to be praying at least one of them wants to step into your shoes, because with 3 boys, that's a wonderful opportunity. You can let 2 of them go whatever, do whatever, but one of you has to.
Yeah.
Chatting to you last week, I got a sense that the pandemic lockdown hit you quite hard and you were forced to innovate to keep some form of cash flow. Tell us about the late bottling of last year's stock and your library stock as well that you had to tap into.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I think there's also realized with one sometimes get a bit of tunnel vision of your own challenges, especially during last year. But I'm also very much aware that there's every single industry, every single sector of every industry that a huge challenge, and I'm always very mindful of that. Obviously, within context of the wine industry, it's nice to be able to share a bit of my challenges. But in general, we all know it's been a super tough time, and still is for all of us. So, so what I did last year. So normally my bottling run is at the end of March or beginning of April, and I made the decision, well, just before knowing lockdown is coming, I think years ago, when will I be able to sell these wines that I'm bottling now? And I thought, well, for a 3-week period, well, that's fine. I'll bottle after 3 weeks, and then we all know what transpired from that. So I decided, well, let's look at it a bit differently. And since 19, so the first wines under the Overgaauw label was released was the 1970 vintage. And over time, my grandfather, my dad, and myself, we had the discipline to put a few cases of every vintage of every wine in the library, and just as part of keeping the library alive, really. And I've always postponed sorting it out properly, because bottles from 1970 all the way through to current vintage was always putting it on the back burner. We'll keep on picking a few vintages here and there, but let's do it properly. So lockdown, then I literally started monitoring and counting every single bottle from 1970 all the way through, and did some benchmark tastings, shared some of the older vintages with some other winemakers and friends and family, and then realized, well, there are some amazing, well, I always knew there are amazing gems of old South Africa, old Overgaauw wines, and started sharing or making those available to customers that were looking for wine and also what inspired that was during lockdown, when everybody couldn't buy wine, and you started noticing everyone raiding some cellar. So either their dad's cellar or their grandfather's cellar, and then I'll get these random posts or messages from customers who would send a picture of an old Overgaauw that they got hold of, an old 80 or 85, or then some of the 90s. So you can see people are realizing, well, let's go find some wine somewhere. So it's nice to see people appreciating that, and that really sort of helped just sort of bridging the challenges of last year in a sense, and ultimately just great to be able to share the old vintages with people that I know appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing. Was it the 89 Merlot that you opened for us last week? I think it was 89.
Last week, yeah, it was the 89 Triacorda together with the 2017 pre-release, and it was the 93 Merlot. Yeah,
was 93?
It 93 Merlot with a 19. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely sensational, and also quite amusing to me to think that back in the day there was such an anti-Merlot single varietal bottling. Eh? I mean, the way we imbibe Merlot now and the passionate followers that it has, you can't imagine that there was that mindset in South Africa. Absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
To the wine we are tasting today, and this is the Sylvaner. This is something very, very special in South Africa, as I believe you are celebrating the 50th year of being South Africa's first and still sole bottler of this varietal. Hey, sure, congratulations.
That's right. Well, thanks for that reminder. I actually didn't really look at it that way when you, but just to show I've got the same wine in my glass here.
Why do you think Overgaauw is still the sole bottler of this varietal in South Africa? I mean, that's got to be quite a strange one.
I've been asked that question a number of times, Guy, and it seems like I always sort of struggle to answer the question. But I think probably the most notable reason would be if you think of Sylvaner as and its popularity internationally, it's known, but it's not a very popular cultivar. So I think from a marketing perspective, people might think to you, okay, but it's a interesting cultivar, but is it worth planting? Maybe even thinking, well, Overgaauw has been making Sylvaner for so long. maybe we would not consider it because they're the only one doing it. I don't think there's any of that, but what I would say is that if you look at Sylvaner as a cultivar being part of the Riesling family, so it's got its origins from Franken, the Franken appellation in Germany. Very popular in obviously in Franken, but also you get some plantings in the Alsace in France, and then the Austrians and the Swiss have planted some or have quite a bit of Sylvaner planted. But if you look at the sort of the strategy of some growers and some winemakers who are experimenting with new cultivars, importing, for instance, Astertico from Greece, and well, there's a whole bunch of cultivars the guys have been experimenting with. If you would look at the reason why they're experimenting is to see how these cultivars could potentially adapt to climate change. And if you would look at that list, Sylvaner would probably not be on that list to be planted in South Africa. So wow. I think that's probably also the main reason. But because we've been owning the cultivar since 1971 and been working with it on Overgaauw, I think because it can be a very tricky cultivar. It rots easily. It's got a maybe one of the major reasons for guys not planting it is because of the fact that if you consider comparing it to Sauvignon Blanc, you would normally get 650 liters of 1 ton of grapes, but with Sylvaner, I'm lucky if I get 500 liters of a ton. So it's quite a viscous juice to work with. So your yields can sometimes be a little bit too low. So I think economically that would be sort of also maybe another reason. But yeah, in general, it's just nice to be able to share a very unique cultivar to people that are. Well, and I've also noticed that there's definitely a longing for guys to try something or consumers to try something different, try something else, and that's where Sylvaner is quite a nice little change of scenery.
Got an absolutely beautiful nose that just keeps you coming back because it's not immediately obvious what you get on there. I mean, obviously you get fruit, but for those who've never had the privilege of tasting this unique wine, how would you describe it? What is it closest to in terms of another white wine that they may have tasted? And you mentioned it's from the Riesling family, so I presume that would be your answer.
Yeah, so you do get a little bit it's because of the same family. But what I found interesting is that it's not as aromatic and floral as you would imagine a Riesling or a Gewürztraminer or a Bukachaba or those cultivars would be. It's a lot more restrained. It almost has a bit of a hint of gooseberry. You get a little bit of that slight sort of floral rose petal character coming out with that gooseberry, but then sort of a hint of spice as well. And
I think I remember
what makes.
I think I remember, sorry to interrupt you. I think I remember saying to you when I first tasted this that it almost feels like there's 3 pillars on the nose, as you say. You do get that bit of a gooseberry, that fruit, and then you get the other 2 aromas that comes through, that hint of spice as well, but that lovely floral note that just covers the whole thing like an umbrella. So you've got to really give it time on the nose.
For sure, and there's something about a wine for me, not only this wine, but as we're having the conversation about the wine, if you go back to the glass and you pick something different up every time you go back to it, then with that obviously creates a bit of a talking point. And as you just said, you're talking about the 3 pillars. So every time I need to go back to a wine to figure it out and search sort of why am I enjoying this wine. For me, that's always sort of a telling of firstly an interesting wine, but secondly a well-made wine as well. And maybe one thing that I mentioned, and I actually noticed it yesterday because I had a glass of this, and actually on Saturday, quite a nice cold glass of Sylvaner. And I spoke to Jaco Engelbrecht also about it the other day because he had a glass of Sylvaner, and I've noticed that the wine is quite temperature sensitive to serving. So with the Sylvaner, you don't want to serve it too cold. You almost almost want to have it at probably say 13, 14 degrees Celsius, and not too cold, because it's quite a fragile little cultivar. You want to avoid it being too cold, because then it's just keeping all of the elements and all of those, let's refer to that 3 pillars you're talking about. It's keeping it all sort of to itself and tighten it. So I would suggest not to serve it too cold, and that's also why I'm always suggesting, well, personally, this is my winter white wine. It's wine just sipping a glass of white in front of the fireplace would always be a glass of Sylvaner. So not too cold, but it's got a, but then because if it's not too cold, you get the lovely texture of the wine coming through on the palate as well.
You say texture, that's exactly it. I was just thinking, it's got such a beautiful rounded mouthfeel, and I'm wondering, is there any kind of wooding that you do with this that gives it that roundness?
No, but I'll give you a bit of so there's no oak use on it or in a conventional way, but I have about 2 or 3% of the blend was actually a bit of an experiment that I started with as advice from a winemaker from Franken making Sylvaner. So I converted an old vat in about 2 years ago, which is almost a 100-year-old vat my grandfather was still using. So I would ferment a little bit of the juice in that old barrel, and then leave it on the lees for a bit longer, and stir the lees quite a bit, and that component definitely adds to the texture of the wine. So it is a small component barrel ferment, but completely. Well, I hope whoever's listening, anyone sort of visiting the farm, and obviously would like to get you out there sometime soon, then I'll show you the barrel. It's quite a unique little vessel that I use as a bit of a, call it a salt and pepper on the Sylvaner.
Got you. Sure. Well, it's working. You're doing very well with that. And there is, as it says, there is that crispness to it, but it's not an overwhelming acidity that comes with that crispness. In fact, that's right. There's a dryness, again, not related to acidity. There's this dryness that happens in the middle of your taste, and then suddenly the acidity kind of kicks in and you get that salivation again. It's fascinating drinking. I can see why you say this is your winter white, because this is the kind of wine you can sit with a fire and just sip and think and analyze and enjoy. Sure.
Absolutely. And maybe having just a light curry with it, and maybe even some lighter meat dishes. This wine will be, well, out of my own experience, is a nice combination.
I'm definitely going to get myself a couple of these, because I'm a big fan of curry. So I think this will be a wonderful match, and the citrus will just add that fruit that my wife wishes I would add to the curry. Which I don't. It's too much spice for her.
Right.
When it comes to your red wines, David, your 93 Merlot was quite literally perfection in a glass for me. And it really did show the aging potential of your latest release, 2019. The Triacorda Bordeaux blend. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this or whether it was something secret that you were telling me. So you must just tell me to shut up if it is. But it's been traditionally Cab Sav led, with Merlot and Cab Franc following. But you mentioned a change to that formula has occurred with the 2017 vintage. Can you tell us more?
Well, seeing that you've put me on the spot now, I guess I have to tell the truth, right?
Well, you can tell me just to move along. And next question, please.
No, I'm more than happy to share it. So, and I think it's also a bit of a testimony to the varietals on the farm. So the Triacorda is, my grandfather claimed that he could read, write, and speak Latin. I don't think he could do any of the three really. He just loved the language. So when he had to think of a name for the Bordeaux blend, it's decided on a Latin translation, which is three. So Triacorda is 3 hearts. So it refers to the 3 hearts of the estate: Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. But because I've been putting such a big effort into the Merlot vineyard and also the Cabernet Franc vineyard, and I mentioned earlier of them both being virus-free now. I've got a older 1989 Merlot planting, which is the old Italian MO3 clone, which still plays a very important part of one of the building blocks in the Trio Quarter blend. But 2017 was just that vintage where I felt the Merlot is just sort of creeping up onto the Cabernet Sauvignon, which is always the backbone of the blend. So 2017 is the first vintage where the Merlot is actually dominating the Cabernet Sauvignon a little bit, and which I'm actually quite excited and proud of. It's not because the Trio Quarter for me has always been the main objective was to put the best quality wine the state has to offer in a bottle. So whether that's a blend, or whether the Merlot, because in some vintages you do see that they dovetail a little bit. Sometimes in a great Merlot vintage, the Cabernet is not that great, or in a great Cab vintage, the Merlot is maybe falling a bit behind. But then the Cabernet Franc is just that cultivar that just somehow sort of has this love-hate relationship with Merlot, I find. And the minute you do some benchmark trials and you blend literally on a very fine scale, at one point the Cabernet Franc just brings out all the goodness of Merlot. And if that happens, like it happened in 2017 vintage, the marrying of the Merlot and Cab Franc is then my component that I use to decide how much Cabernet Sauvignon do I need with that. And 2017 was just where the Merlot Cab Franc combination just sung so beautifully, and the Cabernet Sauvignon had to take a bit of a slight back seat on this vintage. I'm not gonna mention or say it's gonna be like that every vintage. And the 17 I felt was where the Merlot and also the bit of the legacy of Merlot and of shone through really well on the Trio Quarter.
Nice that you're able to release that in the year, that 50th anniversary year as well. Was it 50 years of single bottling of Merlot? Is that my memory serve me correct?
So 80. Well, the 82 vintage was the first Merlot. So where 2022 would be the 50-year celebration for. No, where we? Yes, well, I made 40 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So my maths never been a strong point for me. But the other thing I wanted to ask you about that is that how was your vintage for 2020 looking? Because obviously 2017 was one of the shining stars. So it'll be interesting to see if Merlot doesn't stand up again for when you do the blending of this last harvest, 2020.
Yeah. So 2020 I was
2021.
Looking at the component. Oh yeah, we're talking 2021 now. So the current vintage has passed. Yeah. So it's 2021. What I do notice is, and it's been interesting also, that although the drought of 2017, 18, and 19 has now been broken a little bit, but you can definitely see the bit of the ripple effect of the drought still manifesting itself and we all knew that from the beginning, that it's going to take a year or two or three for the vines to recover properly, and mostly due to the groundwater table being low. So we're all super thankful for a great winter last year, and then now it seems like we've had a good start to winter as well, but we knew we were going to need about 3-4 good winters to catch up properly, especially the groundwater table. But 2021 seemed to be, the Merlots are looking good. Cabernet, especially the Cab Franc, is in good shape. So yeah, so we just got to keep on chipping away at it and keep on keeping our finger on the pulse
and keep on selling wine and not have any more lockdowns to mess everything around.
Yeah, let's hope so.
David, besides wine that is true to its roots, what are some of the other reasons for us to visit Overgaauw Wine Estate?
Yeah, so as I think you mentioned, we did have a conversation about it. So Overgaauw is not one of those properties where you're going to have a whole lot of tour buses stopping outside, and we try and keep it very, very personal still. So all the tastings are by appointment, which is actually quite special, because then I know well, I can make some time for it and make sure that I'm here and keeping it personal, and we'll open up a few old vintages, and we'll so there's always sort of that very personal family touch. And I always sort of invitingly saying that if you arrive on the farm and you can find an open door at my house, you're welcome to come in. There's always the open bottle of wine and a glass, so we're always ready for a tasting. But what we've also done recently is so we have a function venue on the farm, which we converted 1 or 2 years ago, and then obviously I had to close it down last year, and we're warming that up quite sort of over the last 3 or 4 weeks, where we do private functions and do a few odds and ends. So what I would suggest is for anyone to go onto the Overgaauw website and to go register on the mailing list. I prefer doing most of this very specific communication on mailing lists, obviously a bit on Instagram as well, and on Overgaauw Wine Estate. But get on the mailing list, and then whenever there's anything happening that's always very bespoke and specific to Overgaauw, then we'll keep you informed for sure.
Excellent. Okay, I'll let you go, but before I do, quick fire questions to end. David, you can give one-word answers if you want, or some of them you'll have to go into depth. Favorite varieties to drink, and I say varieties because I know it's unfair to expect just one, but if you want to peg your hat on just one variety, you're welcome to do so. But favorite varieties to drink.
Sure. I've thought about that, and I think it's pretty much asking me like, which one of my children do I like the most?
The one that's going to take over the farm.
So it's a pretty difficult question, because I would probably say my favorite wine would be a wine made with a specific intent, and that communicates a sense of place. And so obviously my passion would always be red Bordeaux cultivars and white Bordeaux cultivars, Sauvignon and Semillon. So those would be my preference. But then I appreciate, especially with a good friend that's a winemaker colleague, trying some of his best wines. So I think I'm giving you a too long answer, but well, clearly making the choice of which one of my children I like the most, I guess, it tells you why it's a bit of a difficult question to answer.
Sorry, I know it is a tough one. What's your most memorable wine tasting experience? Besides drinking wine with me last week.
Oh, okay, well, that's got to be way up there for sure. So, Guy, I would probably say, well, the first thing that comes to mind is a very fond memory, actually sitting around this table with my grandfather. He was probably he passed away in 2008, but I recall having a glass of 1970 Overgaauw Cabernet, which was the first wine produced under the Overgaauw label. So although we've been producing wine since 1905, the first Overgaauw labeled wine was the 1970 Cabernet. And we pulled the cork, and my grandfather and myself finished the bottle. And I was the first or second year at varsity, I can't remember, but it was just and he had a bit of Alzheimer's, unfortunately, in the end, and it was just sort of at the start of that, but to be able to share a wine that put sort of a Overgaauw on which was basically the seed of the Overgaauw brand, to be able to really drink and enjoy a glass of wine or that whole bottle with him was super memorable. That's probably, that'll definitely be, nothing will trump that.
Yeah. Oh, that's very special. What would you say is your greatest achievement as a winemaker?
Sure.
Forcing you to boast about yourself again.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I really struggle to do that. I guess biggest achievement is when I pour a glass of wine to Nicole, my wife, which might be a pre-bottling sample, and she likes it, then I go, geez, because she's a very honest critic. So if Nicole says, listen, this is a good wine, then I find that's a great achievement. But then also to be honest, recently I poured a glass of wine to a family friend that's been enjoying Overgaauw wines for many decades now, or for many years, and I would probably rate it as one of, well, always sort of the greatest achievement as a winemaker personally is when someone takes drinks a glass of wine, and in this case she said, "Oh, but when I drink and taste this wine, it feels like I'm sitting in your dining room on Overgaauw. It's so accurately Overgaauw wine is stated in the bottle." And I get obviously accolades and all of that. Those are important commercially, but I think personally, as for me, that would be, and I always aspire that. But if I know that whatever is in this glass is, well, firstly our heritage, but then very specific our intention and discipline and everything that we've discussed. If that's communicable in a glass of wine of when you pull the cork on a bottle of Overgaauw, for me, that's what I always aspire to. And if someone notices that, then I'd like to think that was a great achievement.
Speaks to the sense of place, as they say. So that it is a wonderful compliment. I know that you've got a cottage that's been passed down on the farm, Shepherd's Cottage. Newlyweds go and get an opportunity to live there until the next newlywed needs a place to stay. That's a story for another day, but I'm just giving the background to this question that I'm going to ask. And of course, you've been planting Portuguese varieties, Touriga Nacional, Touriga Nacional. Torrega is my Portuguese is not so good this morning. So, quick one for you. Favorite between the two, shepherd's pie or chicken trinchado?
Are we having Merlot or Touriga? That's the question. Well, just celebrating this morning it's got to be the trinchado. I think a glass of Touriga and the trinchado this morning will be something to look forward to.
Brilliant. Well, you can get along to Liquor City Claremont to buy Overgaauw wines. And if you fancy your luck, then answer the easy question here on the Via the Grapevine page. And you could win. I'll let David tell you what you could win.
All right. So as I mentioned earlier, I enjoy venturing into the library on occasions, and I enjoy venturing in there knowing if I can pick a bottle to share with people. So in this case, I decided to make up a 6-bottle mixed case that represents the 5 decades of Overgaauw winemaking. So I've picked and I'm going to keep it as a little bit of a surprise on the one end as well. So there'll be a selection of 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, 2010s. So it'll be a very specific selection from the library. I check every bottle myself. I check the alleges. I check that it's so that's I always enjoy making up a mixed case like that, and I'm super excited to be able to share that as a prize for all your listeners and wine lovers out there. I'm looking forward to share those.
Again, a prize that I don't think I'm going to be able to part with. So I think I'll make sure that you deliver it directly to the winner. That doesn't come through this house because it might not leave. Wow.
Well, come and visit me on the farm, and then we'll pull one or two and enjoy them.
Definitely. David van Velden, thank you for your time and passion today, sir. Much appreciated. This Via the Grapevine.
Lovely to speak to you.
Thank you, sir. This Via the Grapevine brought to you by Liquor City Claremont. Visit their wine emporium for a journey via the Grapevine.